Well, hey there, Sunday School. Today we are going to hear the story of Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, so if you think back to the story last week, God had spared Isaac's life, and he was very pleased. God was very pleased with Abraham's faith. Abraham had showed God that he loved him, God, more than anything else, even more than his child. So now Isaac had gotten a little older. He was an adult now, and his dad Abraham decided, it's time for Isaac to get married. It's time for him to find a wife. Now Isaac was all about this because he was kind of lonely. His mom Sarah had died since she was very old when she gave birth to Isaac. So he was lonely, and he thought that would be a really good idea. So back in those days, the person, so like if you're gonna get married, you actually wouldn't go out and find a person to marry. It was actually your parents who did that for you. They would work hard to find someone who would be very good for you as a husband or a wife. So that's what Abraham did. He called in his main top head servant, and he made him promise something very serious to Abraham. So this servant, he was like the main guy. He was in charge of all the household. He did everything Abraham needed. He kept it all nice, took care of all the animals, all that stuff. So he was in charge of all the other servants, and he was a really good guy. He was very faithful to Abraham. He was loyal, and he loved God above all else. So Abraham knew he could trust this servant, and he said, okay, dear servant, we don't know his name. Dear servant, I need you to go and find my son Isaac a wife. And so normally you'd just be like, okay, like let me go into town and I'll find. But here's the thing. Abraham and his family, they all loved the true God, right? God of the Bible. But they were surrounded by people, and so lots of ladies who believed in false gods, and they worshiped idols. So Abraham's like, no, you can't just go around here in our land. You need to actually go way, way over where other people live, our family and other people who believe in the true God live, so that you can find a wife for Isaac there. So the main servant, he made that promise to Abraham, and he started out on his journey. So he trekked a long way. He made the journey, and he got to a town called Nahor. And outside of that town was like this spring. And so the main servant, stopped there to rest. And it was like getting towards evening. The sun was going down. It was really pretty, but it was also hot. So this main servant really needed a drink of water. And guess what? He had also taken 10 camels with him. So they were really thirsty too. So the servant got to that spring, and he sat down, and he's like, man, I don't know how I'm going to find this lady. How? I don't know these people. So he closed his eyes, and he said a prayer to God. He said, dear God, please send a woman who loves you. Please send her to this spring to go and draw water. And let me ask that woman for a drink. And have her say, yep, I'll give you a drink. And then have her do one more thing. Have her say, and I'll give your camels water too. So the servant was praying that prayer. And he had his eyes closed, he was praying, and then he opened his eyes. Before he even finished his prayer, here comes Rebekah. Now, Rebekah was a wonderful young lady. She was pretty, she was pure and faithful to God. She loved the true God. And she would be a wonderful wife for Isaac. So as soon as the main servant saw Rebekah, he's like, okay, let's try it. So he asked Rebekah, can I please get a drink of water? And she was drawing up the water, and she said, sure. And she gave him some water. And then not only did she just give Abraham water, but she said, let me give water to all your camels too. That would have been a big job to get all that water for her camels, for his camels. So she did. She drew up more water, gave it all to his camels, and the servant knew, okay, this is the lady for Isaac. God has answered my prayer. So as soon as the camels had finished drinking their water, the servant gave Rebekah these gorgeous gifts, very expensive. So he put all these beautiful gold bracelets on her arm, and then he took this gold ring and put it on her nose. Back then, it was very lovely for women to wear nose rings. So he gave her that ring and all these gold bracelets, and it was so cool. And he said to Rebekah, who are you? Who's your dad? Do you believe in the true God? Basically, is what he was trying to find out. And she said, oh, well, I'm the daughter of Bethuel. And then the main servant was like, well, can you go ask your dad if I could stay the night? I've just been on this really long journey and I need to rest. So Rebekah is like, oh yeah, my dad will totally let you stay the night. And we have lots of straw and fodder for your camels. So Rebekah rushed back to tell her family that this person had just given her these beautiful gifts. And so she rushed back to her house, and while the main servant was kind of gathering his camels, getting all ready to go, he was kind of heading in that direction. Rebekah's brother, Laban, actually rushed out because he had seen Rebekah's like beautiful jewelry, and he's like, whoa, who'd you get that from? And he rushed out and met up with Abraham's servant. And he said, come, I've prepared a big old feast for you. The house is ready. We got a room ready for you. Come on over. So the servant followed Laban, and he met up with Rebekah and her family, and they laid this huge feast out for him. But the servant sat down. He's like, okay, before I start eating this wonderful meal, I have to tell you why I'm here. And they're like, oh, okay, go for it. And then he said, I came here to find a wife for my master's son. And he explained, this main servant explained that he's not from around here. Isaac lives far away, but he was a believer in the true God. And he told them the whole story. The main servant told them the whole story about the prayer, about the woman and the well, the drawing the water out of the spring, and then asking to water his camels. And so he told them that whole story. He's like, God answered my prayer. This is the one that God wants Isaac to marry. And the dad and Laban were like, well, yep, I'm pretty sure that's God putting his hand in this, and he wants Rebekah to go with you, servant. So they said okay, and Rebekah, she trusted in God. She believed that God had a plan, and so she was gonna go. Well, her mom, so they go to bed that morning, they wake up, and her mom and brother are like, well, why don't we let her stay like 10 more days? Because, we want to say bye and let her see everybody, which, makes sense. But the servant was like, no way. I got to get back to my master. It was such a long journey that it had been a long time since the servant had talked to Abraham, and he was so excited because God had answered his prayer right away. So he's like, I can't. Let's go. And the mom and the brother are like, well, let's make sure that's okay with Rebekah. So they went, they asked Rebekah, and she's like, yep, I'm ready to go. Let's head out and let me meet this guy, Isaac. So they set out on their way, and before they left, the servant gave Rebekah's family more gifts. So like silver and all these like really expensive clothes and everything that was so nice to show them that he was so grateful and that he would make sure Rebekah got taken care of. So they set out on their way, and Rebekah had her nurse with her. So that would have just been like someone who was by her side, who would have helped her as she grew up, a dear friend who was there as her attendant, her helper. So they set out 10 camels, the main servant and his men, and then Rebekah and her attendants. They set out for the journey, and they were riding on their camels, and then they finally got to the place where it was near where Isaac lived. And Isaac actually happened to be out in a field, and he was meditating, he was praying. So he was out in that field, and then he looks off in the distance, and he sees all these camels with people, and he kind of recognizes, okay, I know that guy, but I'm not sure who that is. Like, who's that girl? I don't know that lady. And he looks over, and he like realizes, like, wait a minute, this might be my dad's main servant. So he drops everything and heads to the camels. Now they're pretty far away. So Rebekah looks up and she sees him coming. She sees Isaac coming towards them. And so she got down from her camel and she asked the main servant, she's like, who is that guy who's coming? And the main servant's like, well, this is Isaac. This is the one you're going to marry. So Isaac got there. He greeted Rebekah. He greeted the servant. And they got married right away. And Abraham knew that Isaac was going to be the one that would have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, and finally they would inherit the land that God had promised them. And that is the story of Isaac and Rebekah. Bye, Sunday School.